Good morning, and thank you for joining today's program. In Solidarity and Strength is a webinar series launched by the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles to support Israel and the Jewish community during this historic crisis. Through weekly webinars, participants gain an insider's perspective on Israeli resilience, the recent surge in anti-Semitism, firsthand accounts of those impacted by the war, the Jewish community's organizing, and much more. This educational series features subject matter experts who will provide ongoing learning opportunities to make us more informed as we collectively work to support Israel. Today's webinar is LA Rabbinic Solidarity Mission, Witnesses of the War. Last week, over a dozen LA-based rabbis participated on a whirlwind trip through Israel, witnessing the carnage, heartbreak, and resilience of the Israelis in the aftermath of the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th. Today, we will hear from a trio of rabbis who participated on the mission about their experience in Israel, what they witnessed, and what comes next for our congregation's support for Israel. We invite you to submit questions throughout this morning's conversation using the webinar's Q&A function, and our moderator will direct them to today's panelists. Please welcome our moderator for today's conversation, Zev Hurwitz, the Jewish Federation's Director of Synagogue and Rabbinic Outreach, who accompanied the rabbis on the Solidarity Mission.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you all for joining us for this really timely conversation. In the days after the massacre on October 7th, and as the war has raged on, there was growing interest in organizing a rabbi's mission to Israel from our Board of Rabbis community, from our greater LA rabbi community. And we were grateful we were able to arrange for 15 rabbis and one cantor to join us for just 2.5 days on the ground in Israel on a mission that arrived last Monday afternoon. And we were back at the airport Wednesday night and got back Thursday morning last week. And when we were there, we were in an Israel that is unlike any Israel we had ever visited. The airport was virtually empty. Posters of hostages on bus stops, street signs, city walls across the country. I'm blessed to be joined today by 3 rabbis who each are going to share some of the vignettes from our time in Israel. Rabbi Nicole Guzik is senior rabbi at Sinai Temple, Rabbi Ehud Sela, Rav at Temple Ramat Zion, and Rabbi Sarah Haransky is senior rabbi at Temple Beth Hillel and the current president of the Board of Rabbis of Southern California. Before we jump into our experiences, though, I'd love to set the stage and ask each of you to share what was your headspace, what were you thinking about as we were getting ready to go on this mission? What motivated you to participate? And I will start with President Rabbi Sarah Haransky. Where was your head at?
Where was my head at? Our head was geared towards how I could be a source of strength and comfort for our brothers and sisters living in Israel, and how we could gather enough information to bring home to our communities here in Los Angeles and around the United States to share what it's like to be in Israel at this time and what the future will be like, as much as we can guess, and how we can stand with Israel in the many, we thought days to come. I think what I took away from this mission is years and years to come. But my ultimate goal was to just be fully present during the time that we were in Israel, to bear witness, to be listener, and to be a source of love, hugs, and uplift and strength.
Sorry, I always see other people doing that. Now I'm doing it myself. Rabbi Guzik, where were you before we left for Israel last week?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And I just want to also make notice that Zev, you put together such an incredible group of people, group of rabbis, and itinerary. In terms of the headspace that I had before going on the trip, I've been to Poland now on 3 separate occasions, on March of the Living and a trip when I was 16 with the United Synagogue Youth. And over again, as we traveled throughout Poland, the same phrase that Rabbi Haransky used, we said we wanted to use, we wanted to bear witness in terms of the atrocities that happened to our people so many years ago in the Shoah. And to be able to use that phrase again to say we want to bear witness to the atrocities and horrific events of October 7th, I don't think we could really imagine what it meant to actually do that in living real time. But that was the intention of which I think many of us decided to go on this mission, that our people deserve to have their stories told, seen, heard. As many of us are trying to be warriors on social media, we're finding that there are already deniers of the events that have taken place on October 7th, which is just unfathomable. And so I know as rabbis and cantors, we wanted to be leaders in our community and go as soon as we could and as soon as we would be helpful to be able to say just that this is truth. These horrific events did take place. These horrific events are still taking place as people are continuing to deny that they occurred, and to bring home these stories and to figure out ways, which I'm heartened to be able to say that the rabbis have already kind of come together via WhatsApp, via email, to determine what's the best use of our resources, what's the best use of our time, so that we can give our congregations in the greater Los Angeles community the tools to be able to say, how do we help and what's next?
Thank you, Rabbi Guzik. And just to add more thank yous to the pile, the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles has an Israel-based team that was so instrumental in putting together this mission. Aaron Goldberg, Shira Katz-Winkler, and of course, Rabbi Noah Farkas, our CEO, accompanied this mission, chaired this delegation, and this trip is really a result of his vision as well. Rabbi Sella, tell us where your head was at before we left LAX, and then we'll jump into some of the experiences in Israel.
So my thank yous, of course, because it really is tremendous that the Federation organized this mission for us and for everyone who put in the work. It wasn't the first time I've been on a Federation mission. I was on one in 2003 when I was still a rabbinical student. And that's when I first realized the importance, as we understand as rabbis, as first responders, of being present. It's not enough to just feel bad. Showing up is so critical. So part of it was simply to be present for our brothers and sisters in Israel, because there aren't people going. The tourists are not there. The only people who are going are Israelis going back to connect with their families or serve in the IDF and reserves, or people who are going on solidarity missions. And they need to feel that constant support because they watch the media as well, and they wonder, where is the compassion, where is the understanding, where is the world, why aren't they speaking up for us? Because it's a deeply wounded country right now. So the first was that, and the second was to, again, as Rabbi Guzik and Rabbi Haratsky said, to bear witness and to bring back the information. Because if you're an American and you're getting your news from regular American media, or even if you're a little bit more sophisticated and getting it from English language Israeli media, you're not getting the full story. I've now started to watch Israeli media in Hebrew, and my Hebrew is not perfect, but I get some of it, and they are telling very different stories and sharing very different information than you get in the English language or American media. And so I felt the need to bring back those stories as a firsthand account and a representative of the Jewish community back here to the Jews who aren't able to go right now.
It's Tuesday morning. We've spent the night in Jerusalem. We've had a sit-down conversation with John and Rachel Goldberg-Pullen, who are the parents of Hirsch Goldberg-Pullen, who's being held hostage in Gaza. We've met with Avi Meir, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, who's given us the framing of this moment in Israeli history. We've woken up, we're on a bus, and we're heading southwest towards the kibbutz of Kfar Aza on the Gazan border. Rabbi Sella, tell us about that morning.
So I'm going to show you some slides because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I'm just going to begin by saying that I lived in the kibbutz that is right next door to it. And I remember it's a very beautiful area. And I want to show you initially a video of what it's like to drive in, because initially it looks like a kibbutz should look. It's beautiful and pastoral. And just those first few seconds don't obviously tell the story of what happens just a few feet away. And it's kind of... it is very disconcerting to go from a beautiful landscape of a kibbutz to the horrors, which I will show you as well. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is the entrance to Kibbutz Kfar Aza. This is what you see when you first drive in. It may not look gorgeous to all of you, but this is pretty typical. Beautiful kibbutz, fruit trees, things are in bloom, houses, everything looks quite normal. The one thing that isn't normal is that there are no people. This is a kibbutz that has hundreds and hundreds of people, and the only people that were there that day were people who were there, sadly, to tour and to bear witness. So an empty kibbutz already is a sign of something's wrong. And then you walk a couple hundred feet into the kibbutz and you start to see the hellscape. And obviously something terribly wrong has happened here. These are the areas where the younger people would live. Once you turn 18, you can live in your own space. And these were the places that were closest to the border, and they were just attacked, completely destroyed, burned. It's a war zone, and it feels wrong to be there. You feel like you're doing some kind of violation walking through this scene. The only thing that's been changed is that the bodies have been removed and the blood, and I hate to say body parts, have been taken by Zaka, by the Israeli emergency services that does reclamation of bodies so that they could be buried. The fires were so intense that some bodies are still being identified, and the ash is still present. You can still smell it in the air, even though this was over 50 days later. This looks like it could be a scene on the moon, but this is Kfar Aza. This is the home of the mayor of Kfar Aza, the Itamari family. He was trying to organize the defense of the kibbutz. He didn't have his automatic weapon that was stored in the armory. He only had a sidearm with him, and he used that to try to defend the kibbutz in the first few minutes. This is the place where he was killed. You can see the bullet hole in the flagpole outside of his home. You can still see his blood on the bottom, the stains of red, as he was shot dead, as he was trying to make his way to the armory so that he could defend the kibbutz. I want to share with you a moment that wasn't planned, but still sticks with me. So we're standing on a little raised area, and what you see is the border fence, and those buildings out there are Gaza. So Gaza is about a mile away from the border. So you can imagine, as soon as the attack began, how quickly the terrorists came in from Gaza to Kfar Aza. And as we're standing there, we're listening to the head of the regional security, a man named Sion, a big Sephardic guy. But he's breaking down as he's telling us about the defense of the kibbutzim that he's trying to organize. He's responsible for a number of them. And so he's calling the heads of the security groups in each kibbutz. And he's trying to make sure that they are organizing their individual defense. And this is all happening between 6:30 and 7 a.m. And he's saying, well, he calls someone at 6:35. And by 6:40, the second time he calls them, they're not answering their phone. And he later learns that they're dead. He calls another person at 6:40, speaks to them. Yes, we're going to the armory. By 6:45, he's calling them again to check on them. They're not answering. That's how quickly the terrorists came in and how quickly the defenders were overwhelmed. It was such a devastating, devastating attack. And he's breaking down because these are not just people he knew or he worked with, these are his friends. And he lost dozens and dozens of friends that day. And he feels somewhat responsible because he couldn't organize the defense fast enough. And I'm sure that it's going to weigh on him for the rest of his life. And as we're hearing this terrible story, and as we're empathizing, we're standing there overlooking Gaza, all of a sudden the loudest explosion I've ever heard reverberates over us. Now, we were there blessedly during the ceasefire. We were actually told that day we didn't need to wear our military issued helmets. We only needed to wear the flak jacket. So we left our helmets on the bus, and all of a sudden over our head, there is this huge explosion, and we all jump. We all assume that we are under attack. And for me personally, I questioned, did I make the right decision? Was I stupid and naive for showing up in a war zone? Because that's what it sounded like. It sounded like we in our place were being attacked and being bombed. Now Tzion, God bless him, didn't flinch. He just kind of went on, because apparently these explosions were happening all the time, because what was happening was the army, the IDF, was detonating explosives in the field there as they were finding more and more things that the terrorists had left. But it stayed with me because for those 5 seconds of not knowing what was going on, it was one of the few times in my life that I've been scared for my life, that I really thought this could be the moment that I'm going to die. And it gave all of us, I think, just the tiniest taste of what it meant, what it felt like to be a person in those kibbutzim. But it wasn't for 5 seconds for them. For some of them, they were in their shelters for days. Some 12 hours, 24, 36, some 2 full days, wondering, is this going to be their last moment? Constantly wondering, is this going to be their last moment on earth? And that stays with me, because when we talk about why is Israel fighting for its survival, because its citizens shouldn't have to wonder every second of every day, is this the last day on earth for them? And so I want to share just this last picture of a sukkah in Kfar Aza, because October 7th was Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeret in Israel, and they hadn't yet taken down their sukkot. They were going to take them down the next day, but obviously they haven't. So for some people, they're still stuck on October 7th. It's now December, but they're still there. They're still in that moment. And so for a lot of the country, to understand what is going on for Israelis, we have to understand that they're still very much living October 7th over and over again. And I'll end there.
As we're leaving Kfar Aza, we're told that residents of Kfar Aza can expect to return to their homes no sooner than a year and a half, maybe 2 years from now. And this is a very raw and very ongoing and live situation for the community there. So Rabbi Sala, thank you. We leave Kfar Aza, we visit the Bedouin town of Hura, we meet with representatives of an organization called Ajik Nisped. It's an organization that is supporting Jewish and Arab Israeli communities in the Negev. And we head north, and we're heading north to an IDF base called the Shura base. Rabbi Guzik, tell us about the Shura base.
Oh, I just want to say to kind of, right? I think we're all feeling the same thing right now. To hear you, Rabbi Sela, go through the pictures and the journey that we all witnessed, it's very hard to honestly kind of go through it again and watch this again. And so I can only imagine what it's also like for people to see that for the first time. We're watching right now. And also Zev to kind of then ask the question, like, let's go to Shura base, knowing that that's the journey that the civilians and IDF soldiers who were killed on October 7th, that they made this same journey, that from Kfar Aza and from all the kibbutzim and various moshavim on the Gazan border, that all of these 1,200 plus innocent civilians and innocent IDF soldiers who were murdered in their sleep, the journey that they took was to Shura IDF base. And the reason why I say that is because Shura is the place in which all of the bodies were both being identified and also laid for holy burial. And we visited Shura now something like, what was it, everyone, 54 days or something like this, 54 days after October 7th. And so we can only imagine the hundreds and hundreds of dead bodies that were piled, the way that was described to us, piled even on the ground, because there was no room for the bodies to exist, and for the Jewish tradition for bodies to be on the ground waiting for holy burial is unthinkable. So we had this story told by a young man that will forever have a place in my heart, from Benzi, and I've spoken about him now several times. And what he said to us is that, he was called on, he was called up for reserves for Miluim, something like the night of October 7th, October 8th. And he was confused because he thought to himself, I was never a combat soldier. I have no idea, kind of what matters. He dealt with matters of halakha, of Jewish law, as part of his IDF service, he had no idea what he might see as part of his reserve duty. And then when he arrived at Shura, he was told that he would be part of this identification and burial process. And he said to our group, you know, I never touched a dead body before. This is just something I had never encountered. And maybe it was because he was speaking to a group of rabbis, I'm not sure, or maybe he's just reaching out in every possible way that he can. But he reminded each of us of the Mishaberach prayer, where in the prayer for healing, you know, a prayer that we say daily, a prayer that we say on Shabbat, we pray to God for refuat haguf, we pray to God for the healing of our bodies. But he asked all of us to remember refuat hanefesh. He asked all of us to remember what it means to pray for someone's soul. And he said, I really hope that you remember my name and pray for my soul. And so I think that when we look at what's going on in Israel, when we look at what's going on and think about October 7th, it's not just a date, it's not just a number, but these are individual people and individual stories, people who are reeling from the aftershocks of this day, reeling throughout his tour. And so when I say tour, what that meant is that he was showing us on the compound exactly where each body would be identified. And remember, when I say identified, as Rabbi Sala explained, some of these bodies were raped, mutilated, and then burned alive. And so when we're talking about identification of these bodies, it is a deeply intricate process, and bodies are still being identified to this day. And so he walked us through that process, the forensics process. And he also emphasized over and over again how important it is to the IDF soldiers who are involved in the identification process to be involved in kavod hamet, in honoring the dead. And how most people look at Jerusalem and look at the Kotel as the holiest place in Israel. And now really to certainly to Benzi and to many on that base, Shura has become the holiest place in Israel. What he also mentioned to us, just want you to think about this young man's mental health, is that he questioned his own mental health throughout this process. He said within the first few days, he noticed as hundreds of bodies were coming in, and as he saw sights that he can never unsee or forget, he didn't cry. And he was actually scared that he didn't cry. And he said he forced himself to see a family identify their child. And it was only when he saw those parents crying, witnessing the death of their child, that he realized he had tears running down his face. That's what Israelis are experiencing right now. They're questioning their own mental health because they can't even begin to process what they've had to witness over the course of the last 60 days. I say all of that, and yet we were also brought into what I would say is a true room of hope and Jewish resurgence. Zev, I don't know if you want to pull up this picture of the Sifrei Torah. Okay, thank you. I found this to be quite remarkable that while at Shura, they are identifying and burying dead bodies and look at really each burial as one of the holiest, holiest tasks and mitzvot that someone can take on. They also explain to us they look at each body like a Sefer Torah, and this is also a place where Sifrei Torah are prepared to go out into battle for those units who request one. So what Benzi's commander, I would say, said to us is that, sometimes one or two Sifrei Torah are requested to go out into the fields to accompany a unit. But this year, since October 7th, 40 Sifrei Torah have been requested, and more, as you can see, are being prepared, so that our troops, so that our IDF men and women feel protected. There's this resurgence of faith and tradition. I mean, it's quite remarkable. What they also explained to us is that they're in charge of preparing seat for those who want to wear seat out in the field. And so they prepared something like 33,000 pairs of seat for the soldiers to wear. Well, those seat were claimed in one day. And what I think we're finding is not just in Israel, but also in the United States and the diaspora, is that there's this resurgence of Jewish tradition and faith. And when we ask ourselves, especially during this time of Hanukkah, how are we going to find the light in the darkness? I think we're doing exactly that by trying to come together in community, by connecting with God, with Israel, with each other. And the ways that we may find those steps out of the darkness is by grasping onto the sparks of light of our own tradition. So that's what I took from Shura. There are so many more stories from that IDF base. And at another point, I'm happy to share.
Listening to you speak about the Shura base, I'm transported back there, and I'm walking the Sefer Torah room again, and I'm walking the family visitation room again, and I'm back there. And so thank you for taking us back there. Rabbi Haransky, it's the afternoon, it's the evening. We've already had an extremely long and very emotionally taxing day. We drive back to Jerusalem, and some time to shower, some time to get cleaned up, and then we're going to dinner. There's more programming on this day. What are we doing for dinner? Who are we seeing? What's happening that evening?
Thanks. I was just commenting to both Rabbi Sala and Rabbi Guzik. Listening to them, it was like the first time. It was like I was experiencing it myself for the first time. It was a very intense 55 hours on the ground in Israel. And the opportunity in the evening was a bit of soul repair for us as clergy, as well as the clergy in Israel. We were able to gather with the New York Federation trip, as well as Israeli Rabbinic. And I had been speaking to my colleagues in Israel across time and hearing their stories of being the only ones to show up at Shiva because everybody else had gone off to war and to serve, sitting day after day with families whose other family members are being held hostages, what it means to be praying with community day in and day out, where your congregations are literally in a place of war, in a place of unknown, what it means to have displaced people arrive in your community and holding their souls. So to sit down to dinner, and on one side have a member of the Rabbinut, a conservative woman, and on the other side, a member of the Rabbinut from a Reform congregation, and be between these two souls, provided an opportunity for really deep connection and support and care, talking and listening and hearing, and sharing, and their deep concern for Jews in the diaspora and what we're facing in America and if we are safe. We don't often, as rabbis, get to sort of hold one another or be in our own pain, our own trauma. And so to sort of be able to validate that for each other was deeply, deeply meaningful. At one point, I looked to the rabbi at my right, and I looked in his eyes, and he looked in my eyes, and I said, we want to be here for you. And he said, in all of the time since October 7th, the only time that I felt like a human being is when I looked into a rabbi's eyes from outside of the land of Israel. And he said, I didn't feel that anyone could see me at all, except for this other person. And he said, when I look in your eyes, my eyes are different than yours. He said, when I see your eyes, I see eyes that are whole, and my eyes are forever broken. and the eyes are the window to the soul. And so the only space that I feel that I can be me is by looking into the eyes of you and other Rabbinut from around the world. We can be wholly ourselves and fully broken and be held. And it was 3 minutes in a dinner conversation, but it was 3 deeply important minutes of service to one another. I can't imagine the pain our colleagues are holding. We hold pain here, and their pain is extraordinarily different and constant and always. And the fact that he says his eyes will never be the same, and they will forever be broken, and no one can see him except for those who are on the outside that fully look directly in his eyes, forever moved my soul. We shared dinner, which is sort of the nourishing one's physical body as well as nourishing one's spiritual soul is significantly important. So following dinner, we walked into a space of prayer, beautiful music and prayer all together. We heard from both our delegation rabbis as well as rabbis throughout mostly Jerusalem and Tel Aviv were gathered together. We heard their voices, we heard prayers, and we heard the voice of Honor's parents. Honor was killed on October 7th, the music festival. He was a mensch in his life, every day of his life. He was also Hirsch's best friend. The two of them gathered individuals together in a bomb shelter, and Honor said, you know, he's a soldier, and he said, the IDF is coming, and I'm here to protect you. And he had everyone lay on top of each other, protect themselves, and he stood in the face of terrorists and picked up the grenades they were throwing into the shelter and threw them back out. And he saved life after life until the grenade blew up on him. Honor was a hero every single day of his life and a hero at the end of his life. We heard the testimony of his father, and then we witnessed, Honor was also a musician, we witnessed the debut of a piece that he had written being shared with all of us. And his mother and father were able to hear his music be brought to life, and that his life and the message of his life would continue long forward in all of our hearts through this piece of music and through every act of menschlichkeit behavior that Honor performed every single day of his life. We were there for each other, and this service not only will forever uplift Honor's memory, but also brought healing to each and every one of our souls in that room. Whether you were there in the Federation mission from New York, whether you were there on the Federation mission from Los Angeles as a rabbi, as a cantor, whether you're there as Israeli Rabbinut, our souls were held and embraced and allowed us to move forward to our next day of activity, of leaning in and listening and being very, very present.
I'm dropping in the chat here for everyone a link to a YouTube video, a very short recap that the organization that put together this Tuesday evening program made. And after the webinar, check it out. It's a couple of minutes that really only starts to scratch the surface of what we're experiencing in the moment at this dinner and program. We wake up the next morning, pack up our things, back on the bus. We're heading west again. This time we are going to a kibbutz called Ma'aleh HaChamisha, and specifically the guest house, the hotel that is on the campus of Ma'aleh HaChamisha. And we're there for a couple of hours, and we have a couple of different groups and clusters of individuals that we're meeting with. Rabbi Guzik, tell us about who we met first at Ma'aleh HaChamisha.
Sure. So what I would say is this experience, I think, was most indicative of the kind of Israel this changed Israel that we're seeing. We met evacuees from kind of two different communities, from Zikim and Nativa Asara. And I just want to give some context for a moment. Since October 7th, we've had Israelis displaced from both the southern areas near the border with Gaza, but also the northern border with Lebanon. I want to say upwards of 300,000 Israelis have been evacuated, displaced, both around Israel. And as we know here in the States, we've had so many Israelis come to Los Angeles, really looking for respite since the war has begun. So what does that mean? Where are these Israelis going who are still living in Israel? It means they're going to places like this, different hotels, if you will, around the country, who are trying to make makeshift homes, makeshift schools, cafeterias, makeshift homes for these families who really had to get up with almost nothing and restart their lives the next day. And it looks very different, as I said, kind of 54 days later, as it did the first few days of the war. We had a chance to meet in our group. We met two different evacuees, also at very different stages of their lives. We met Moira and we met Amos. So Moira, I want to say, is in her 70s. She happened to tell us that day was her 49th wedding anniversary. And the emotion that she displayed, emotions were sorrow and anger, that you can imagine. It's someone kind of, later kind of division of their life, 70s and 80s. They're ready for retirement. They're ready to enjoy their beautiful home, the home that she bought and built with her husband. And she kept saying over and over again, all I want to do is return home. And I don't remember who said it, but you heard that for some of these places, it may take upwards of 2 years to fully return home and to be settled, back in these kibbutzim. And so for Israelis to live with this kind of uncertainty is so incredibly difficult. So we have some Israelis who say, I'm just ready to go back. And then you have someone like Amos, who has two teenage children. And what he explained to us, and by the way, Amos is the head of, I want to say, his kind of regional council of Zikim. So he has this intense dedication and responsibility to his people. And so what he said to us is he has these two teenagers who, by the way, are not living with him at the hotel any longer. The children and his wife are living with family members, I want to say, in Tel Aviv. So he said that is already, that example is already kind of an analogy as to the breakdown of the kibbutzim model, because you have these close-knit communities who live together for so many years, children who are raised together, who are now being, who are separated all over the country, right? So kids who are living next door to each other, families who have been celebrating all these traditions together year after year, are now, this kind of beautiful, idyllic lifestyle is shattered. And then, we asked him the question, do you want to return home? And he said, I really don't know. I have a responsibility to my people. And at the same time, how do you bring children back to a place that they associate with murder and horror and nightmares? Is that really fair to children? And so what I think is important for everyone to hear and understand is there's no simple return overnight. I mean, we have people who need to pay their rent and mortgages, people who are saying out loud, I don't think I can ever go back to that place. And so how do Israelis, on one hand, help an economy return to its thriving nature? how do Israelis return to homes both in the south and the north, where they really continue to experience uncertainty and fear every single day. And yet at the same time, I will say, thank God for Israel, because we have Israelis who are making these makeshift homes as livable and as beautiful as they possibly can. So I think that Rabbi Horansky is going to speak a little bit more about the services that are provided in these hotels and some of the services that Federation is providing. But for me and for many of us, it was a huge wake-up call to the trauma that Israelis are continuing to experience day after day. And I encourage everyone to learn more about the stories of the evacuees, because those are the stories I believe we are not hearing in the news. And those are the stories that deserve to be told.
The room where we meet some of these evacuees is a part of the guest house of the hotel that is now being used for meetings, for art therapy. It looks like an art studio. There are children's drawings on the walls. They're sitting at tables with markers and paper. We leave behind the art therapy studio and we move to a conference room for conversations with leadership of some of these organizations. Rabbi Horansky, tell us about the meetings we had after we met with the evacuees.
Yes, so we had the opportunity to meet with Omer Ghazi of the Israel Trauma Coalition. The Israel Trauma Coalition was sort of established 20 years ago-ish in the wake of the Second Intifada. It's a lot to do with our federation system, supporting and embracing this group. There used to be several different groups working in trauma, and this sort of united the forces together. ITC has been to China and Nepal in the wake of disasters. They were here after the Woolsey fires, working with our Jewish community. They're experts in trauma, and they have been working with the community really in the Gaza envelope and down south for years and years and years at this time. And now their work is geared up in a different way. They had these beautiful centers that people would visit to provide therapy. Even our Zion, this individual that Rabbi Sala spoke about, had been working with them, because if we can imagine what it's like to live in a place where missiles are constantly falling upon your head and you're constantly seeking shelter, trauma is a very real part of many Israeli individuals' life, let alone those who have served in the IDF. ITC has been a partner with the LA Jewish Federation for an exceeding long time. Really, they've also been working up north. They have these, what they call resiliency centers. It's been an example for the country. The problem is that what was just a few centers now needs to be spread over like 160 different destinations as people have been evacuated. And as Rabbi Guzik said, like one kibbutz may be in 3 different kibbutzim. People may be in with their friends or family. People may be even in the United States or other countries. Everyone is spread, all of these evacuees. So reaching them is exceedingly hard. And they are trying to, on the ground, be present, continue to train individuals. The staff is encountering and embracing. They're bringing art therapy to these evacuation centers. Before October 7th, they had about 250 therapists, and they are now at about 500. And that's just serving those who have been evacuated communities. They have social workers and therapists in about 600 in line for training, because again, we're looking into the long term. They are looking at resiliency. When we talk about what are these factors, physical safety, feeling a sense of control, and community. So physical safety has been torn away. Where were the soldiers? Where was their protection? Who is there to save them? We're talking about in these little kibbutz and moshav places, kids running around barefoot, able to be out at all hours of the night, sleeping in their sukkot, walking on the beach in the morning and camping out overnight. Many people were camping because of the holiday weekend. Where was their safety? If they return home, is it safe? Parents didn't protect them, our army didn't protect them. What that sense of physical safety is in peril. Feeling that sense of control. Who do they trust? The government? The army? For the kids, can they trust their parents? Can they trust their teachers? A lot of our kids were pulled out of their schools. Their teachers are either serving or were murdered, or spread and evacuated themselves. Those places of normalcy have all been disrupted. And when your community is divided, there is no place to feel normal. And so, yes, they're in these evacuation centers. Yes, ITC is there and offering therapy, including art therapy. We also met an amazing group, Hotam, that has been serving at risk, especially socioeconomically at risk communities, in education. And so together with the regional council in the South, you've got educational services, trauma services, and the ability to work together with regional councils to establish educational centers. So when the kids get up in the morning, they were going to rooms on the kibbutz or rooms in a hotel for activity. And now we're seeing schools being opened and Hotam staffing the schools with really specialized teachers that receive ongoing training to absorb these students that are traumatized and are showing at-risk behaviors because everything around them is unstable. And then the schools, are they separate from, or are they integrated into? How does that look? If they give them a teacher, will that teacher be with them more than a few weeks? If they move back, does everything start over again? So there's a lot of feeling of in fluidity and in flexibility. It's also a lot of feeling of not a strong foundation. So Hotam and ITC are working to bridge that. Folks have been asking me in my community, how can we help? How can we serve? I'm a therapist, I'm a this. Yes, we can serve in that way if we can provide a longer term solution. Going for 3 days is not gonna be of service because they're looking for stability. So if you're a therapist and you've got multiple language centers and can access and be present and can go for a month, they want you. If you're a social worker and you can go for a month or several months, they want you. If you are a doctor, again, with the help of our federation, they're able to get you licensed in Israel. You may not serve those evacuated communities or soldiers, but you may provide a space of service to the community at large so that doctors that reside in Israel can serve the soldiers and the evacuees. So there are ways for us to help by supporting the Israel Trauma Coalition, which has been doing amazing work for decades. And the work ahead they're telling us will take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years to help walk through this trauma, have foundation be solid, as well as this group called Hotam, which are training teachers on the ground and offering continued support as these kiddos are navigating. And I say kiddos, but we're talking about the littles, but we're also talking about teens as they're navigating a really unclear future. Hotam is training and serving in ways that is beyond our capacity actually to filter and understand. And it is a beautiful partnership between our federation and these groups and the knowledge that we can continue to support, not just in this immediate crisis, but in the years to come, as trauma is a very long-term situation.
After our meetings at Ma'ale Hamisha, we go to a farm to spend some time harvesting sweet potatoes for Leket, Israel's national food bank. And then we visit the Shamir Medical Center Hospital, where we not only see the basement, gymnasium, parking lot areas that have been retrofitted into hospital wards that are safer than the ones that are above ground due to rocket fire and projectiles. And we also learn about some of the cutting edge technology at the medical center. Really fascinating advances in stem cell research and treatments for PTSD. We walk past this massive tube-shaped facility where folks are getting these really, really cutting-edge treatments to address brain injuries and head trauma. We're now walking around the streets of Tel Aviv. It's the evening time, and we approach the plaza outside of the Tel Aviv Museum. And Rabbi Sala, tell us about our visit to this plaza.
So part of the ongoing trauma, obviously, is the hostage situation. Israel's faced attacks before and is really good about binding up the wounds after terrorist attacks. But the fact that there are hundreds of hostages, thank God, obviously, over 100 have been released, and they were being released while we were there. But still leaves such a festering wound. And I hate to say it almost even makes people look past the initial trauma of 1,200 people being killed on October 7th, because people are still focused on the ones who could be alive. And it's still such a festering wound for the Israeli public, because they're not even being treated as prisoners of war. We don't even know for sure if they're alive or dead. The Red Cross has not been permitted to visit them. Hamas obviously has not provided proof of life, and sometimes said that they're dead, and then they release people who they claimed were dead, and they're playing psychological games, and it's still extraordinarily traumatizing. So outside the Tel Aviv Museum and a block away from the Ministry of Defense is this huge square, which has now been renamed Hostage Square. And I'm going to share some video and some images with you to understand how Israelis are trying to deal with and process this trauma that they're going through every single day, and doing it through art, and how it's kind of showing the mood of the country. So in Hostage Square, there's a huge clock that is counting the seconds, and obviously minutes and hours and days. This is obviously already over a week ago, so it's not accurate anymore, but it just reiterates that for every second, they're still feeling this tremendous pain. And every second is agony, as they're just wondering if their family members are alive. In many cities, but including in Hostage Square, they've set a table for every single hostage, saying that this person is missing from someone's table, from someone's home. And when you think about what 240 empty places at a table looks like, this is what it looks like. It's not just a couple of people. And Israel's had hostage crises before, where a few people were taken hostage. 240 still seems to boggle the mind. And obviously, thank God, now it's down to 138. Although there are still some people who are missing, and they're not even sure if they're dead or taken hostage, because we have no information. There's a lot of art around the square. So I'm just going to show you a few images. This is showing, how this has affected the whole country. Because on the one hand, yes, the communities in the South obviously were directly affected when they were attacked. But of the largest number of people were killed at the Nova Music Festival, and those were people from all over the country. So it really touches every single home and every single ethnicity. There were Arabs who were killed. There were Bedouins who were killed. It's not just one particular community that's feeling this trauma. This piece of artwork says, Yatsanu lirkod matay nachzor. We went out to dance. When will we return? Kind of just underscoring how this seemingly was supposed to be such a joyous day. If you were religious, it was Simchat Torah. If you were secular, it was just a day to have a lot of fun. And obviously, it turned into one of the worst traumas in Israeli history. This image on the right just kind of underscores how Israel is feeling in terms of comparing this to the Shoah. So you see one hand, obviously, with a number tattooed, remembering the victims of the Shoah who were remembered that way. And on the other is someone wearing a bracelet from the festival that says the 7th of October, 2023, Nova. And then interestingly, a religious phrase, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, the eternal one of Israel will not lie or will not be untruthful. Because there is obviously, even amongst the secular, there's a sense of religious trauma of how could this happen on a holiday? How could this happen on a day when people, even if they weren't, celebrating as the most religious Jews, how could this happen? Where is God in all this? And it certainly makes religious and secular Jews, anytime there's a trauma, it makes them question. This image is of the Bibas family. They are, I think, the last two children who have not been released. They're famous or infamous because of their bright red hair and of the fact that they are so young, and that their mother was holding them, both of them, an infant and a toddler, trying to shelter them. And there's videos of her. You can see the fear in her eyes. And we don't know about them. Hamas has claimed that they gave them to another terrorist group. Hamas has claimed that they've been killed, but we obviously will hold out hope. And that's what the quote from Menachem Begin is essentially saying. He says, what is freedom? Or freedom is that I still have faith even in the most tiny shred of life. So as long as we believe that it's a possibility that the hostages are alive, Israel is going to try and do what it can to free them. In one area of Hostage Square was a tent that was set up by B'nai Akiva. B'nai Akiva is a religious Zionist youth group. And I found it interesting because obviously Tel Aviv is a very secular place. But here they set up this tent as a place of prayer, and they asked people to write prayers on yellow hearts. I know here in the United States, we're doing a lot of blue symbols for the hostages. In Israel, the symbol is yellow. I think that's the international color for hostages. But obviously, it's not, like there's a divide, as sometimes there is in Israel, between secular and religious. This is a chance for the religious community to say that we also have a place here, and we want to provide a place of prayer in this hostage square. This is just another image, little homes. And just what really got to me is what it says. It says the first name of each person, and then it says, Rotzeh habayta. So-and-so just wants to go home. They just want to go home. A map of Israel, again, showing that this affects all of Israel, but with faces of those who were kidnapped to make it obviously very personal. This is so personal for Israelis. I saw in the Q&A, what's different about the Israeli media. I think they're showing more traumatic images, but they're also just showing a lot more personal stories. There are some things that are appearing in the American media, but if you can imagine, they have 24-hour news cycle like we do, and they're filling up a lot of time with interviewing and talking to families of whose loved ones were killed, families whose loved ones were wounded, families whose loved ones are taken captive. And so there's just a lot more personal connection for Israelis. This is not just some war over there. They're not just focusing obviously on what's going on in Gaza. They're still very much living in October 7th. This image is of the hostages, and they put reflective mirrors in the middle to remind you that it could have been you. If you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, it could have been you. And they have hundreds, sometimes thousands of people gathering there every single night for the past 2 months now. They sometimes have prayer circles, sometimes they have different art performances, different speakers. This little video I'm just going to play for you a few seconds. Some group of musicians were playing. I'm not the most up on Israeli culture, but I didn't know this song, and I thought I would, know about it. But all of a sudden you can, the Israeli public is singing along. I'm not sure if I have the sound, but just going to play a little bit. You just have to go along with me. That all of a sudden you see everybody here singing along, because there really is a sense of unity there in the pain that they're feeling. I guess you're not hearing the sound, so I'm just going to go to the next slide. So just end with this re-emphasis on the fact that Israel is really still focused, obviously, on the war, but on how the war can help release the hostages. But there is a lot of tension in Israel between people pushing for the hostages to be freed, and what's the best way to do that versus conducting the war, and how to do that. And as much as there is unity in Israel, there is still a lot of tension because of the trauma. And as important as the unity is, as critical as the unity is, what people are really feeling still is just a lot of raw emotion. And what I want to bring back to you and have you understand is that they really need to feel our presence and our love and our connection, because they're still feeling this so in such a raw way 2 months later. And everybody there was so grateful for us, and it felt so wrong for us to be thanked, because they're living it every single day. And it felt so strange to go home, because we could go home and you can close your eyes and pretend, for a minute that it's not happening. And they are living it every single day for the past 2 months, and they cannot ignore it, and they cannot look away. The images of the war and of the hostages are all over Israel. And so we still have this tremendous responsibility to not turn our heads away, to not turn a blind eye, and be there for our brothers and sisters.
Since October 7th, the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles has raised over $31, possibly $32 million at this point for our Israel Emergency Fund. A lot of the organizations we spoke about today, the Israel Trauma Coalition, Chotam, the Shamir Medical Center, Leket, Ajik Nisped, the communities in the South, have all been recipients of Federation support. So contributions that are made to this emergency campaign, jewishla.org/Israel Crisis, all goes to support the resilience and the rebuilding and the continuation of support for the Jewish state. I know we're running a little past time here, but in addition to financial support, one of the questions from the chat, in addition to financial support, how can American Jews be supportive of Israel at this time? And I know over the course of the 2.5 days we spent together in Israel, there were a couple of different moments where we said, here is a way that we can support Israel. So I'm going to open it to whoever would like to weigh in here. What, in addition to financial support, what can we do to be supporting Israel right now?
In terms of the hostages, the Goldberg Poland family reminded us, and there's a website, and I think Zeb's going to put it up, that takes just a couple minutes every day to make sure that this is on the agenda of the American administration. And it's not calling actually your Congress people or your senators, but it's calling some particular people in the White House administration, in the executive branch of government, who deal with hostages, and to continue to put the pressure on our government to support the negotiations to try and get some of the hostages or more hostages freed. So that's a very tangible thing, and you need to do it every single day, and it takes just a couple minutes a day.
And I would just add to that, I mean, Hanukkah's beginning. And so if you just think to yourself, okay, each night of Hanukkah, I want to highlight one hostage's story. And I want to make sure I highlight their name, and to try to dedicate that day and that night to that family and to their story. Instead of it being, again, a number, I think that'll gain a lot of traction. But that's what we're being asked to do, is to highlight individual names and stories instead of kind of numbers that, kind of don't do justice to the value of each person.
Sharing the stories of people's lives matter. So whether it's a hostage's life or somebody who was killed, sharing their life story matters immensely in lifting them up. So as Rabbi Guzik was sharing, an easy source to do that is on the Jerusalem Post, which is written in English, posts every single day the story of one of the hostages. And you can repost it or reshare it or dedicate your candle as you light your Hanukkah menorah to this individual and their life story. And the more that we share publicly, if you're in social media, even if you're feeling a little scared, the more we share, Israel sees how much we care, and not just the anti-Semitism that is existing in America and around the world. So every time we show we care, it uplifts and heals souls in Israel.
Rabbi Guzik, Rabbi Sala, Rabbi Haransky, it was a privilege to be able to travel to Israel with you during this time. And we're all very appreciative for you sharing your reflections and your thoughts and your experiences with us this morning. As I said, the Jewish Federation is supporting the efforts being made on the ground in Israel. Please consider making a contribution, jewishla.org/Israel Crisis. Thank you all for tuning in this morning, and with prayers for peace, wishing everyone a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Hanukkah Sameach as well.
Kano Hatsune.
Thank you.
You all.